this video, I'm going to share how to become a successful public speaker without sacrificing your freedom or your lifestyle in the process. First, I'm going to cover what can go wrong as you create a speaking business and how quickly it can become a grind. Then I'm going to share a little bit about my own story and what I learned about my own business. And finally, a new context for looking at a speaking business, plus some steps that you can take to set one up powerfully. I approach speaking businesses in a very unusual way, and part of that comes from my story. Like many speakers, I started out with this business because I wanted to be on a stage and I wanted to help people, make an impact, teach people. But very quickly what I discovered was that I was spending the least amount of my time doing the thing that I loved, and most of my time doing a lot of what I didn't love, which was admin, operations, emailing, writing proposals, having meetings, negotiating, selling, and all of that stuff. And so what I discovered is that the traditional speaking model, the one that most people think of when they start a speaking business, is actually quite flawed. Now, the traditional model is essentially that you get hired by a company, by a person, by an event to come in and give a speech. And that's in theory, theoretically, that's an awesome business model. Imagine you just pick up the phone, somebody says, "Oh, I want you to speak at my event." You say, "Sure, here's my fee." And that's it, you have a deal. The truth is that it never works like that. The truth is that being a speaker with that type of model, which is what I call getting paid to speak model, is quite difficult and it requires a lot of outreach, a lot of tracking, keeping lists of prospects, following up with people, sending proposals, all the things that I mentioned earlier, I didn't really love to do. So the solution that I discovered, and I discovered it the hard way after spending 7.5 years building my speaking the other way. And aside, parenthetically, I was successful on paper. So at the end of each year, I was growing. 7.5 years I spent growing every year, making decent money, doing well into 6 figures, but not really feeling that successful because the kind of work that I was having to do to make those numbers I didn't really enjoy. Finally, it came to a head. There was a moment where I was working too hard. I was working nights, very early mornings, weekends. I wasn't taking vacations, and something had to give. And what gave was it all kind of fell apart. And what happened in that falling apart, which was ultimately a blessing, is that I recognized that the business model itself was causing the issue. The fact that I was always having to sell the next opportunity and then go and deliver it and sell and deliver and sell and deliver, always with these one-off or short-term deals, meant that I had to be constantly in motion. I couldn't sit back and relax because then the business would slow down and dry up. What I discovered instead was a new model. I call it getting paid from speaking instead of getting paid to speak. So getting paid from speaking looks like, yes, taking on all those same opportunities if you want to, and sometimes I still do, but actually having to take on fewer opportunities, but in front of an ideal audience, in front of an audience that I knew I could work with, that I could serve after the engagement. I call this the back end of speaking. The type of speaking that I talked about earlier, getting paid to speak, is very much a front end model. Getting paid to do that initial keynote or training or workshop, and then that's it. What I focused on now, or what I focused on after those 7 years when I had the aha moment, was building up the back end of the business. So that didn't mean that I stopped doing the front end. I certainly didn't stop speaking, but I didn't have to take on as many opportunities. I didn't have to take on opportunities that weren't in front of my target audience in order to try to get a paycheck. Instead, I could take on fewer opportunities in front of my ideal audience and then have back-end offers, and what I now call the big back end, that I could monetize, and I could monetize for a much longer time. So if this sounds interesting to you, if you like the idea of having longer term revenues, recurring revenues, monthly revenues, then I invite you to start looking at business in a new way. The first piece is positioning. Positioning is the art of putting yourself in front of your ideal audience, which of course begs the question, who is your ideal audience? Now, this I run into a lot of issues with clients, with new clients especially, which is that people generally come to me and they say, Michelle, Who should I work with so that I can make money? Or Michelle, what is a good target audience for me to do this business? And the thing is, we could do that. We could totally come up with a strategy built what I call from the outside in, based on the market needs, based on what opportunities there are out there. And you could fill that gap in the market, and you could make a lot of money filling that gap. But what happens within a year, 2 years, sometimes more, is that it starts to feel heavy. Because if that market doesn't really turn you on, if you don't really love those people, if it doesn't really jazz you up and fill you up on a deeper level, it's going to get old fast. So the key is to get really clear about the audience, but from these two perspectives. Yes, we want to look at what's the opportunity, will they buy what you're selling? But even more importantly, and the question we want to ask first, is who's the audience that you really want to work with? Who do you love to work with? Not who do you feel like you should work with? Who does your mother think you should work with? What does your husband or your wife say? But rather, who really are you on this planet to serve, truly? And that can often mean having to dig a little deep for those answers. The second thing you want to look at once you're clear about your audience is, what are this audience's needs? What are the problems they have? What are the pain points that you can solve through your speaking? You'll want to think about it in terms of, and I'll get deeper into this into number 2, but what's that initial problem that they have that you could solve in some sort of speech? Right? What's that initial aha moment that you could give to people that would have them wake up or their minds open and think, oh, how do I do more of this? What's the next step? Now, again, you don't need everybody in the audience to say that, just a few people, just the right people. And then finally, once you're clear about the problem that you solve, how do you solve it? What's the value proposition of working with you? What's the promise of what you offer? So the positioning piece is about identifying the right audience, finding them, where are they, how can you speak to them, how can you get in front of them? And you don't even need that many audiences. You don't need that many speaking engagements if you've got number 2. Number 2 is after positioning is the model. What's the business model? What's the framework of how you're going to deliver your back-end services? So the front end is pretty easy. You get up on a stage, you deliver a keynote, a workshop, a seminar. But from that front end, that's the first piece, which we talked about a lot with positioning. What is the back end? The back end is, what is that initial breakthrough experience that people can invest in to get some sort of compelling outcome? So I always look at business in these 3 parts. Front end, the speaking, the marketing. Back end, or breakthrough, is what I call it. That's what we're talking about here. What's a breakthrough? Now, personally, I love to deliver the breakthrough in a retreat format. That's my favorite model for a back end, is a compressed 3-day experience that delivers a really juicy outcome. But here's the key. The real key to a successful business, in my opinion, is what comes after that. What comes after that breakthrough. That's the big back end. The big back end is the long-term relationship that you build. It's that mastery that you deliver to people. And from that mastery, from that long-term relationship, it's the monthly recurring revenues that you can generate. That's what creates stability and scalability, in my opinion, in a public speaking business. If you're getting value out of this video already, then I highly encourage you to, of course, finish watching it and check out my whole playlist on different public speaking business model marketing strategies. The last thing we want to look at, and this kind of incorporates from the initial 2, the positioning and the model, is projections. This is something that so many people skip in business in general, and particularly, it seems, speakers, is the numbers. And this is where you can really get a sense well in advance of, is this worth my time? So what I love to do is set up projections where I look at, all right, what's my breakthrough program? What am I going to charge for the front end speaking? Great. Or you can even do the front end speaking for free. And I know that there are a lot of speakers out there that say don't do that, but actually it could be very lucrative if you find that perfect ideal audience and they don't have a budget. There have been many times that I've been paid to speak, let's say $5,000 or $10,000, and that's it. That's all I get, right? And that seems really good up front. But there have been times where I've spoken for free and generated 6 figures out of one audience. And I'm not talking about selling books and programs from the back of the room. I'm talking about making a very simple call to action of, hey, if you're interested in working with me, let's have a conversation, and then enrolling people into my retreat program back end. So my retreat program started in a $2,000 to $2,500 price point, and that is a price point that I highly recommend. Now, I have other videos about pricing retreats and pricing your services, so I'm not gonna get into that here, but what I want you to think about is in a spreadsheet, mapping out how much is your foundational program, how much is your big back end, your monthly recurring mastery program, and to map out how many clients you need to get to where you wanna be. The beauty of the model that I laid out for you, which you can take or leave, is that it adds up over time because you're selling into a high ticket breakthrough program and then into a long-term monthly revenue program. You start to build up a stable foundation of business. And then from that stability, it's much more fun and easy to create new things. If you found this video interesting and you learned something and want to go deeper, then let's connect. Go ahead and visit superstaractivator.com/go and find time on my calendar or someone on my team to learn more about if and how we can support you in growing your public speaking business.